Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you, Trevor, for having me over. Thank you, panel, for being here with me. And thank you, everyone who is sticking around. I have a real treat for you. We're going to go into about a 5-hour discussion on the particularities of every regulation that applies to shipping. So keep your hands on your seat here. Let me explain a little bit about what Abu Dhabi Ports does, and I'm sure that people have described it to you throughout the session, but we are a company that has 5 business lines, clusters we call them. We have our ports, obviously. It's in our name. We have our logistics, and you've just heard Antonio, who's just joined our family, as the head of that business line. We also have maritime, which I'll be discussing. We have digitization, and finally, we have in our industrial zones. I'm going to be entirely focusing on our maritime business. And essentially, there are 4 broad categories of laws, regulations, and supranational frameworks which influence us, Abu Dhabi Ports Group approach to the topic of sustainable financing, sustainable operations, and how we interact with the changing ESG landscape. The first group consists of domestic UAE regulations, right? These are environmental protection laws and regulations that are unique to the UAE. Now, something that I didn't put on there and I thought about putting, and I just thought about it when I was here, is that if you're a publicly listed company, and there was a question last time of who's forcing you to have sustainability strategies, or who's forcing you to think of ESG or the environment. If you're a publicly listed company, that's part of what you need to give to ESCA every single year, right? It's also when you're on your investors' calls with your investors, that's increasingly becoming something that gets asked of you. So that's one place where, at least on a domestic level, sustainability and focus on environmental issues is becoming more important. Really, the biggest group is the second one. The second group are the international regulations that apply to the maritime industry through the IMO, right? Through trading bodies like the EU, ASEAN, NAFTA. And these are the ones that have adapted a number of national and governing body level regulations, and these are now applicable throughout all countries. And this is something that, instead of sort of focusing on the regulations themselves, I sort of want to give the takeaway of this is I want you guys to understand that there is an enforcement type structures that is increasingly becoming prevalent out there, where these supranational laws, or in sometimes even domestic laws that are outside of our jurisdiction, are becoming more important. This section is where most of the important key regulations come into the shipping industry, right? Historically, there have been national laws of nations or trading bodies that have been brought into at the IMO level. It also includes not only IMO regulations, but a number of country-specific regulations, such as the U.S. Oil Pollution Act and the EU emission trading schemes, right? The third box are industry-specific bodies, which seek to enforce these supranational and local laws. For us, the most important one of these bodies is insurance, right? Entities like the International Group, which is a maritime reinsurance group in London, will adapt insurance policy terms which seek to enforce both the supranational rules and as well as national regulations, right? Like the Oil Pollution Act. Similarly, on the tanker side, you have the Oil Company International Maritime Focus Forum in the tanker industry, which seek to implement the same supranational laws as part of their standard form contractual terms. Finally, there are what we call these tertiary policy enforcements, which is really about financing. And through the regulations, they apply to all industries, but seek to streamline these international regulations as a primary mandate. Now, the tertiary regulations are ones which are promulgated by the banking industry, lending banks, and regulatory frameworks of nations, such as for green bonds, proposed by regulators such as the SEC in the US or the FCA in London. And I said, and even here, Under ESCA, we are obliged to undertake certain obligations as well. And these are reflected through mutually enforceable rules that they elect to be governed by, and they enforced by each signatory member state. Now, what happens then is I think there's been a quiet revolution where regardless of your national laws, if you want to be a player in the maritime industry and you want to have insurance that is backed by credible insurers, if you want to have financing that is backed by credible financiers, you have no choice but to follow a lot of these environmental standards that these insurance companies and the financing companies are asking you to adopt, right? It is a system created is a multi-layer enforcement where the requirement of flag countries, credible flag countries, insurance providers, port authorities, and financial institutions enforce compliance with IMO and some country-specific environmental regulations, right? You can play outside that system if you want, but it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be increasingly, that part of the world is going to be increasingly smaller and smaller and smaller. So we at Abu Dhabi Ports understand how this system works and are focusing on complying, right? The fact of the matter is that these regulations are now an unavoidable fact. You need to comply with them. Instead of seeing them as challenges, we're seeing them as providing us with opportunities, right? By investing in a younger or more technologically advanced fleet. By participating with our government, the UAE government here, or at industry level, to articulate our positions, right? And finally, in investing solutions to both reduce our carbon footprint and improve our business model. By doing so, we gain two advantages. One is that we not only seek the advantage of the incentives offered to the companies who treat these regulations seriously. You know, there's partial subsidies for green tech, there's allocation of carbon credits through the EU example, there's access to cheaper and better financing, access to better and cheaper insurance coverage, right? But we also want to be good corporate citizens. And by being a good corporate citizen, we're signifying our financial strength, our agility of finding opportunities in a changing world. And I truly believe that we transmit that we are a reliable corporate counterparty and partner. Thank you very much.